He always liked things under control. Every detail of his life was measured, every person around him carefully placed, and every decision calculated. His house was immaculate, quiet, and precise, the kind of place people would call perfect, but somehow felt empty. And in that house lived the woman who was everything to him, and yet almost invisible to the world. She moved gracefully through the rooms, adjusting cushions, straightening curtains, preparing meals with care, and keeping the house exactly as he liked it, but outside those walls, her presence was almost non-existent. They had met many years ago, in circumstances that had seemed ordinary at first. She had been charming but unassuming, full of laughter that reached her eyes and stayed there. A light he had been drawn to without even realizing it. There had been sparks, quiet conversations, and long walks where the world seemed to pause. To him, she was a companion, a confidant, someone who made even the ordinary days feel like something worth remembering. But over time, life changed. His ambitions grew, the social circles expanded, and what had been shared moments of joy slowly became shadows behind the walls of wealth and status he had built around himself. At first, he had told himself it was for her own good. In his world full of influential friends, business partners, and social expectations, he thought she would never fit in. He feared she would feel out of place, judged, or uncomfortable. So he kept her at home, quietly managing the household, quietly observing him, quietly existing. His colleagues often asked about her at events. He would smile, shift the conversation, and say things like, "She prefers the quiet life," or "She has her own passions at home." And that was it. She was a mystery wrapped in silence, her laughter unheard beyond the walls of their home, her opinions rarely sought in public, her talents completely hidden. She noticed, of course. She noticed the invitations that never came, the gatherings he attended without her, the whispered conversations she overheard on the phone, and the subtle ways he avoided introducing her. But she did not complain, not openly. She loved him, and she believed in him, and she understood, in a quiet way, that his world demanded certain appearances. So she continued her days with grace, waking early to prepare breakfast, checking the household accounts, helping with small repairs, sending him off with a smile, and keeping her own ambitions locked away in the corners of her mind. Yet, even in the quiet of their home, her own life was not as small as he thought. She read books, wrote little notes to herself, tried her hand at painting, and sometimes practiced speeches in front of a mirror, imagining a world where her voice mattered, where she was not just a shadow behind someone else's achievements. She had dreams, thoughts, and perspectives that were as deep and rich as any person in his world. But she kept them tucked away, both out of respect for him and out of the invisible walls he had built around their lives. Neighbors would sometimes comment on how quiet their house was, how elegant, yet still, and how it seemed like the woman who lived there was a ghost. Children would wave, and she would wave back gently, but never step into their games, never draw attention. When friends came over, she would be polite, smiling, and serving tea, but always in the background, never speaking more than necessary, never asserting herself. To the outside world, she seemed almost like an idea rather than a person, a part of his life that existed only to maintain the perfect appearance of their home. He did not see it that way. To him, she was perfect exactly as she was. He admired her patience, her calmness, her ability to make everything run smoothly. He would sometimes tell himself that he was protecting her from a world that could be harsh, from people who might not understand her simplicity, from a society that valued appearances above substance, and in his mind, this was love, he believed. He was caring for her, sheltering her from exposure and judgment, and ensuring her comfort. But there was a quiet cost that he did not notice, a subtle sadness that lingered in her eyes when she thought he was not looking. A longing for acknowledgement, a desire to be seen not just as someone's wife, but as someone with her own light. Their conversations, once full of laughter and plans, had become practical and measured. He would talk about business, about meetings, about upcoming social events. She would listen, offer advice when asked, and nod politely. Occasionally, she would attempt to bring up her own ideas, a new hobby she was exploring, a small project she dreamed of starting, but he would gently redirect the conversation. Not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but out of habit and the deeply ingrained belief that her world was at home and his world was outside. Over time, she stopped bringing up her own desires so openly, learning that silence was safer and smiles were required. Yet, despite the distance, their bond was not broken. There were moments, small and fleeting, when he would catch a glimpse of her brilliance. The way she laughed at a story he had told long ago, the way her eyes sparkled when she discovered something new in her reading, the way she organized a small gathering for friends or neighbors with quiet elegance and care. In those moments, he remembered why he had fallen for her in the first place, why her presence had once been like sunlight in his life. But these moments were brief, fleeting shadows in a life that demanded conformity and appearances, even her. Appearance, something so natural and unassuming, was often a point of silent admiration for him. She dressed simply, favoring elegance over extravagance, and carried herself with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes without saying a word. He loved the way she moved, the way she spoke, the gentle firmness of her opinions when she did choose to share them. But in his world, simplicity often went unnoticed. Flashy dresses, bold statements, and loud personalities captured attention, and he worried that her quiet beauty and intelligence would be overlooked or misunderstood. So he kept her close, close. Enough to admire in private, far enough from the world to protect what he considered fragile. Friends would occasionally nudge him. "Why don't you ever bring her to events?" they would ask. He would smile politely, offer vague answers, and hope the subject would pass. Some of them assumed she was shy, some assumed she had other commitments, and a few whispered that perhaps he was overprotective. He never spoke of the true reason, his own fear. He feared that if the world saw her, they might see her better than he imagined, might admire her more, might recognize her brilliance in ways he had not. It was not just protection, it was control. Subtle and unspoken, rooted in a mixture of love, pride, and insecurity. She, on the other hand, had grown accustomed to the role. She had become the keeper of the household, the silent supporter, the unnoticed partner. But inside, she nurtured a quiet strength. She read about people who had taken risks, who had stepped into the world despite fear, who had let their talents shine. She imagined what it would feel like to be celebrated for herself, not just for her role as someone's wife. She wondered what it would be like to walk into a room and have all eyes turned to her, to speak her mind without apology, to be recognized for her own intelligence, kindness, and grace. These were dreams she kept hidden, dreams she sometimes whispered to herself in the dark of night, where no one could judge her and no one could limit her, despite the quiet sadness that occasionally touched her heart. She never lost hope entirely. She found joy in small victories, a perfectly prepared dinner, a garden that bloomed under her care, a neighbor who smiled at her kindness. She found purpose in the small but meaningful ways she impacted the lives of those around her. And now and then, she caught glimpses of the man who loved her deeply, in ways he could express only behind closed doors, a gentle touch on her hand, a quiet smile of appreciation, a fleeting comment that acknowledged her presence. These moments reminded her that she was not invisible to everyone, that sometimes love itself was complicated and imperfect. Her life was a careful balance between duty and desire, between silence and imagination, between the world she inhabited and the world she dreamed of. She was a hidden gem, polished and cared for in private, yet unseen and underappreciated in public. And she carried this weight with grace, never allowing resentment to cloud her actions, never letting bitterness seep into her smile. She moved through her days with a quiet dignity, embodying patience, resilience, and a kind of courage that often went unnoticed but was no less powerful for it. In this quiet home, this carefully maintained space of order and routine, the stage was unknowingly being set for something extraordinary. Though he had kept her hidden, though the world had barely glimpsed her light, the potential for transformation was quietly building. It existed in her confidence that remained untested, in her patience that had endured years of invisibility, in the unspoken understanding that one day, the world might finally see her as she truly was. And so, life continued in its quiet rhythm, a delicate dance between control and freedom, between fear and hope. He believed he was protecting her, keeping her safe from the harsh judgments of the world. She believed quietly that one day her moment would come, a moment where her light could shine, where her voice could be heard, where she could step into the world without apology. In the meantime, she lived, loved, and waited, carrying within her a strength and brilliance that even hidden could not be dimmed. Even though the house was calm, filled with the quiet sounds of daily life, there was an invisible tension that lingered in the air. She could feel it sometimes when he was preparing for his events, when his mind was consumed by meetings and appearances, and she stayed in the background, waiting for the moment when he would return. She had learned over the years to read the small signs when he was troubled, when he was worried, and when he was simply distracted by the weight of the world he had built. And she had also learned to step carefully, to move in ways that would not disturb his rhythm, to exist in the spaces he had allowed her. Despite being hidden from the public eye, her intelligence and insight were quietly present in every part of their lives. She handled the details of the household, managed staff, negotiated small matters with suppliers, and ensured that everything ran smoothly. Friends who visited sometimes remarked on how perfectly organized everything was, how calm and welcoming the home felt, and yet they rarely acknowledged the one person who made it all possible. She worked tirelessly, not seeking praise, understanding that in his world, recognition came with status, and she was not supposed to claim that for herself. He, for his part, had grown accustomed to the routine. He did not question it. In his mind, the arrangement was practical and protective. She was happy, he told himself, because she had never complained. She was safe, he believed, because she did not need to face the scrutiny of society or the judgment of his peers. And he saw her patience and compliance as signs of contentment, interpreting them as evidence that his choices were correct. But she, in her quiet moments, understood things differently. She understood the isolation, the slow erosion of visibility that came from being perpetually in the background. She had dreams, ideas, and aspirations that she could not voice, and there was a sadness in that. Yet, there was also a strength. She refused to let bitterness take root. She carried her frustration and longing with dignity, channeling it into small acts of creativity and personal growth. She painted quietly in the evenings, wrote reflections in a journal, and sometimes practiced speaking aloud, imagining what it would be like to step into the world confidently and be heard. Her husband, meanwhile, remained unaware of the depth of her inner life. He saw only the surface, the calm exterior, the obedience and support. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of spark in her eyes, a hint of laughter at a thought he did not expect, but he dismissed these as fleeting moments, easily explained by the comfort of home. He never suspected the vast reservoir of intelligence, creativity, and strength that existed just beneath her composed exterior. The tension between their private and public lives began to weigh more heavily as time passed. Invitations to luxury events arrived more frequently, social gatherings became grander and more elaborate, and colleagues increasingly asked about his personal life. He continued to avoid introducing her, inventing excuses, or simply deflecting the question. And she, as always, complied, her patience enduring the repeated invisibility. But inside she felt a stirring, a quiet desire for acknowledgement, a sense that her talents and presence could not remain hidden forever. One evening, as he prepared for a particularly important event, gathering of influential people in the world of business and high society, he asked her to stay home, as usual. She nodded politely, masking the disappointment that flickered across her face. She understood that her presence might complicate his plans, that his social image was delicate, and that she might not fit the mold he had constructed. But that night, as he left, she felt a quiet determination. Something within her was shifting, a small flame that would not be extinguished. She realized that she could no longer remain entirely invisible, that her voice, her presence, and her talents were meant for more than the shadows. Her thoughts wandered as she moved through the empty house. She remembered her early dreams, the things she had once hoped to accomplish, and the people she had once admired. She thought about the women who had stepped into the world confidently, who had allowed themselves to be seen and celebrated for who they truly were. She wondered what it would take for her to do the same, to step out of the carefully maintained shadows and into a space where she could shine at the same time. She knew that change could be complicated. Her husband's expectations were deeply ingrained, and the social world he navigated was unforgiving. She understood that any attempt to assert herself publicly could be met with resistance, judgment, or misunderstanding. Yet, the desire to be recognized, to be valued, and to be celebrated for who she was could not be denied. It simmered quietly, a force growing steadily beneath her composed exterior. Days passed, and small opportunities began to present themselves. A neighbor asked for her advice on organizing a small charity event. She offered suggestions, and the neighbor was impressed by her insight and creativity. A friend of a distant relative asked her opinion on a project, and she contributed ideas that were thoughtful and innovative. Each time she realized that, when given a chance, her abilities could not only be seen but appreciated. These small experiences built her confidence, showing her that the world might respond differently if she were allowed to step forward. Her husband, during this period, remained largely unaware of the changes happening quietly around him. He continued his routine, attended his events, and maintained his carefully curated public image. To him, life was predictable and orderly, and he saw no reason to disturb the balance. He assumed that his wife was content, that her quiet demeanor was indicative of happiness, that the status quo should remain. But she had begun to notice subtle shifts in her own emotions and behavior. She found herself speaking up more in private discussions, offering suggestions and ideas that she had previously kept to herself. She experimented with small changes in her wardrobe, noticing how different colors and styles affected her mood and confidence. She even began to practice social interactions, imagining conversations with people she might meet at future events. Each step was small, cautious, and deliberate. But together, they represented a growing sense of self-awareness and readiness. The household staff, who had long observed her quiet strength and competence, noticed the changes as well. They admired her determination in the way she managed the home with efficiency and grace. Some of them whispered among themselves, expressing surprise at the subtle confidence that had begun to radiate from her. She remained humble, never flaunting her abilities, but the energy she carried was noticeable to those who interacted with her regularly. One afternoon, as she was arranging flowers in the living room, her husband returned unexpectedly early from a business trip. She greeted him warmly, and for a moment he seemed to notice something different. There was a light in her eyes, a quiet confidence, a sense of presence that he had not seen before. He smiled politely, perhaps sensing a change but not fully understanding its depth. She did not speak of it. She simply continued with her tasks, letting her actions convey a subtle message of strength and capability. That evening, as he prepared for another social gathering, he briefly considered asking her to join him. The thought crossed his mind, fleeting and quickly dismissed. He worried that the event would be overwhelming, that she might feel uncomfortable, and that the social dynamics could be complicated. Yet deep down, he could not deny the small curiosity, the lingering question of what she might bring to the room if she were present. He pushed the thought aside, convincing himself that her absence was both practical and protective. Meanwhile, she quietly made plans for herself, imagining a future where she could step into the world with confidence. She visualized scenarios where her ideas were heard, her presence acknowledged, and her talents celebrated. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to be, not just for others, but for herself. A woman who could balance grace, intelligence, and confidence, who could navigate social spaces without fear, and who could finally be seen as more than just the silent partner behind a successful man. The days continued in this rhythm, with her quietly preparing herself and him remaining largely unaware of the internal transformation taking place. She read books on self-development, practiced public speaking in front of a mirror, and explored new hobbies that allowed her creativity to flourish. Each day, she grew more self-assured, more aware of her capabilities, and more ready to embrace the possibility of being recognized beyond the walls of her home. There were moments of doubt, of course. She questioned whether stepping into the world would change the dynamics of her marriage. whether her husband would support her newfound confidence, and whether society would accept her presence. These doubts were real and sometimes heavy, but she did not allow them to stop her. Instead, she used them as motivation to prepare herself, to refine her skills, and to strengthen her resolve. And so, the quiet home became a space of preparation, reflection, and subtle transformation. While the world outside remained unaware of her potential, she was readying herself for a moment that would change everything. She understood that true recognition would not come easily. It required patience, courage, and the willingness to step into uncertainty. Yet for the first time in years, she felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement that something extraordinary was about to unfold, even as her husband continued to navigate his carefully curated social world, unaware of the change growing silently beside him. She prepared for the opportunity she had long imagined. She was no longer content to remain hidden, no longer willing to be invisible. Her patience had not dimmed her light. Instead, it had strengthened it, creating a presence that could not be ignored for long. And in the quiet of the home, filled with the ordinary sounds of daily life, a new energy was taking root. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably powerful. She was ready to step forward, to claim the recognition she had long deserved, and to show the world, and perhaps even her husband, that she was far more than the shadow he had once believed she should be. The invitation arrived on a sunny morning, delivered in a crisp envelope that carried the weight of prestige and expectation. He held it carefully, scanning the elegant script, the names of the hosts, and the list of distinguished guests. It was the kind of event that demanded appearances, careful conversation, and the subtle display of influence. To him, it was another evening to navigate with precision, another stage where he could maintain the image he had built for years. He glanced at her as she moved through the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She smiled politely, her presence calm and understated as always. He hesitated for a brief moment, wondering if he should ask her to come. Normally, he would have dismissed the thought immediately, convinced that she would feel out of place or that her presence might complicate the social dynamics. But something about this invitation made him pause. Perhaps it was the grandeur of the event, the importance of certain key figures attending, or perhaps it was the small spark of curiosity that he rarely acknowledged. What would it be like if she were there? For her, the moment carried a quiet tension. She had noticed the invitation sitting on the counter, had seen the way he had studied it, and she sensed the unspoken question lingering in the air. She had prepared herself over months, quietly building confidence, imagining what it would feel like to be seen. And now, for the first time, the possibility was real. She did not speak immediately, choosing instead to continue her tasks, letting the silence speak for her. Her calm composure hid the excitement that fluttered beneath the surface. He finally spoke, his voice careful. "This event? It's important. I think you should come." Her heart leaped, but her expression remained steady. She nodded politely, careful not to let too much emotion show. "Of course," she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. But inside, she was already imagining the evening, picturing herself navigating the room with grace, and wondering how long it would take for the world to truly notice her. The preparations began immediately. She spent hours choosing an outfit that balanced elegance and simplicity, selecting colors that complemented her features without drawing unnecessary attention. She practiced her walk in front of a mirror, perfecting a natural confidence that came from within, and rehearsed small conversations she might have with strangers. Each detail mattered, each movement deliberate, as she prepared not only her appearance, but her presence. He observed her quietly, noticing the careful attention she gave to herself. He had never seen her prepare in this way for an event outside their home. A part of him felt a flicker of unease. He had always controlled the social spaces they inhabited. And now, for the first time, he would have to release that control, to allow her to step into a world he had carefully curated. But another part of him felt pride, a subtle admiration for her poise and quiet strength. He did not fully understand it, but he sensed that tonight could be different as they arrived at the venue. The grandeur of the event became immediately apparent. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting light across the elegantly decorated hall. The guests moved gracefully through the space, exchanging polite smiles, subtle nods, and the occasional whispered conversation. The atmosphere was a mix of sophistication, wealth, and quiet competition. Where every detail mattered and every gesture was observed, he guided her through the crowd, introducing her briefly to a few familiar faces. She smiled politely, responding with warmth and grace, her movements natural and confident. To the outside observer, she might have appeared composed but reserved, someone who blended into the elegance of the evening. But there was a quiet power in the way she carried herself, a subtle command of presence that drew attention without demanding it. As the evening progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Guests who had initially regarded her with polite curiosity began to notice the depth of her personality. She spoke thoughtfully, answering questions with intelligence and insight. She laughed naturally, a sound that was warm and inviting, yet carried a subtle confidence that intrigued those around her. Small gestures, a tilt of the head, a considered response, a genuine smile captured attention in ways that no one could have anticipated. He watched, at first with mild surprise, as the dynamics of the room subtly shifted. People who had been focused on other conversations began to drift toward her, seeking her opinions and listening intently. Whispers followed as guests remarked on her intelligence, her elegance, and the natural warmth she exuded. The very presence he had once sought to shield now became a center of attention, and he struggled to reconcile the reality with the assumptions he had long held. Throughout the evening, she remained composed, never flaunting her abilities, never drawing attention to herself in a calculated way. She was authentic, and authenticity carried a power that could not be ignored. People were drawn to her, curious about her perspective, charmed by her quiet confidence, and impressed by the insight she offered in casual conversation. Every interaction she had left a subtle impression, building a ripple effect that gradually transformed the room. He found himself both fascinated and unsettled. For years he had believed that keeping her in the background was necessary, that the world might not understand her, that her talents might be overlooked or misunderstood. And yet here she was, effortlessly commanding attention. It's not through extravagance or force, but through a natural, undeniable presence. He realized with a mixture of pride and humility that he had underestimated her at one point. A group of influential guests approached her, seeking her opinion on a project that had been the topic of conversation all evening. She listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and offered suggestions that were practical yet innovative. The guests were impressed, exchanging glances that conveyed admiration and surprise. The husband watched silently, realizing that she possessed a combination of intelligence, empathy, and charm that could not be hidden. The evening continued with speeches, performances, and formal presentations. She participated when appropriate, offering support, encouragement, and insight. Every gesture, every word, reinforced the quiet but powerful impression she was making. Guests who had initially assumed she was a minor presence now sought her perspective, eager to engage and learn from her. The energy around her shifted subtly as people recognized that she was not simply the wife of a prominent man, but an individual of remarkable capability and presence. He could not help but feel a shift within himself. The pride he had once felt in controlling her exposure now mingled with awe, a recognition of the depth and richness of her character that he had never fully appreciated. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that his assumptions had limited not only her potential, but also his understanding of what a partnership could be. The realization was humbling, and it carried with it a quiet sense of regret, tempered by admiration and newfound respect. Throughout the night, she remained gracious and composed, never seeking to overshadow anyone, never drawing attention inappropriately, but simply being herself. And that, he realized, was the most powerful statement she could make. Authenticity, quiet confidence, and genuine warmth were far more impactful than any carefully curated image or forced performance. She had transformed the evening without intending to dominate it, simply by being present, engaged, and true to herself. The culmination of the night came during a toast. When the host invited her to speak briefly about her perspective on community involvement and personal growth, she accepted graciously, her voice steady and confident. She spoke from the heart, sharing her thoughts in a way that was both relatable and inspiring. The guests listened intently, moved by the sincerity and clarity of her words. Applause followed, not out of obligation, but from genuine appreciation. In that moment, she stood fully in the light, and the husband felt a profound sense of revelation and pride. As the evening drew to a close, people approached her to express admiration and gratitude for her insights. Conversations continued, new connections were made, and the ripple effect of her presence lingered in the atmosphere. She had not sought recognition, yet it had found her naturally, flowing from the authenticity and strength she carried within herself. He walked beside her, a mixture of emotions stirring inside him. Relief, admiration, pride, and humility all combined into a quiet recognition. The woman he had kept in the shadows was far more extraordinary than he had ever imagined, and he understood in a profound way that his protective instincts, while rooted in love, had also limited her exposure to the world. Delaying the recognition she so rightly deserved, the ride home was quiet, filled with reflection. She remained composed, her thoughts quietly turning toward the possibilities the evening had opened. He sat beside her, silent for much of the journey, processing the shift in perception, the awakening of understanding, and the realization the woman he had always loved was finally seen by the world as she truly was. By the time they returned home, the house seemed different, infused with a subtle energy that had been absent before. The evening had been more than a social event. It had been a turning point, a moment of revelation and a quiet victory. She had stepped into the world not as someone hidden, not as someone defined solely by her role in his life, but as a person whose presence, intelligence, and grace demanded attention and respect. And he, for the first time in years, saw her in a new light, not simply as his partner or the keeper of his home, but as an individual whose potential and brilliance could no longer be contained. The quiet evening, once predictable and routine, had transformed into a defining moment, setting the stage for change, growth, and recognition that would ripple far beyond the walls of their home. The days after the event were different. The quiet house that had once been routine and predictable now felt alive, as if the energy from the party had lingered in the air. She moved through her tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, her confidence subtly woven into every gesture, every glance, every step. Even the way she arranged the living room seemed brighter, more intentional, as if the world outside had finally acknowledged a spark that had always been there. He noticed the change immediately. She carried herself differently, with a quiet assurance that drew his attention without trying. It was in the way she spoke, the tone in her voice, the ease with which she moved through conversation. He had always loved her, admired her patience, her calmness, and her grace. But this new presence was something altogether different. He realized that the woman he had once hidden away now had a light that could not be ignored, a presence that could no longer be contained by the walls of their home. People who attended the event continued to mention her. Friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances called or messaged to speak about the insights she had shared, the warmth she had radiated, and the subtle yet undeniable impact she had made on everyone in the room. The husband, who had long believed he was shielding her from the world, began to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Her presence had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond the evening itself, leaving a lasting impression that could not be undone. She, for her part, handled the attention with grace. She did not boast, she did not demand recognition, and she did not let the praise alter her demeanor. Instead, she absorbed it quietly, acknowledging it with humility and a soft smile, understanding that the acknowledgement she had long waited for was not about accolades, but about being seen for who she truly was. And in doing so, she quietly shifted the dynamic, not only in the eyes of others, but in the eyes of the husband, who had once kept her hidden. At home, conversations began to change. He found himself listening more attentively, seeking her opinions on matters he had once decided unilaterally. He asked her about her thoughts on projects, events, and even ideas for personal ventures, and she responded thoughtfully, offering guidance and insight that was grounded in intelligence and experience. The balance that had existed for years began to shift, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in subtle, meaningful ways that strengthened the bond between them. Her influence extended beyond the household. Neighbors and friends noticed the change, observing her confidence and warmth in casual encounters. People who had once regarded her with polite curiosity now treated her as someone whose perspective mattered, whose presence was valued, and whose contributions were recognized. The quiet strength she had cultivated over the years now found an outlet, transforming the way she interacted with the world and the way the world responded to her, even in professional circles. The effect of her presence at the event became apparent. Individuals who had attended the party spoke about her insights, her composure, and her ability to engage thoughtfully with complex topics. Some reached out to her privately, seeking advice or collaboration, intrigued by the depth and authenticity she displayed. The husband watched these interactions with a mix of surprise and pride, realizing that the woman he had once believed needed protection was more than capable of navigating the world on her own terms. The transformation was not without its challenges. She had to navigate her newfound visibility with care, balancing the attention she received with the desire to maintain authenticity and humility. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was ready for the scrutiny and expectations that came with being noticed. Yet, she handled these moments with resilience, drawing on the inner strength that had been honed through years of patience, reflection, and quiet preparation. At home, the husband began to reflect on his own behavior and assumptions. He realized that his desire to protect her had in many ways limited her opportunities to grow and shine. The recognition she received was a revelation, forcing him to confront his own insecurities and the ways in which he had underestimated her. It was a humbling experience, but also a transformative one. As he began to see her, not just as his partner, but as an individual of remarkable capability, strength, and presence, their relationship began to evolve. The dynamic of control and protection gradually gave way to one of partnership and mutual respect. He sought her input on decisions, valued her perspective, and celebrated her achievements, both large and small. And she, in turn, embraced her newfound confidence, stepping into the world with grace and authenticity. Fully aware of the impact she could have on those around her, the changes extended to their social circles as well. Friends who had once assumed she was quiet and reserved now approached her with curiosity and respect. Conversations that had previously centered on him now included her thoughts, ideas, and experiences. She became a presence that people noticed, not because of her association with her husband, but because of the unique qualities she brought to every interaction. Her authenticity, intelligence, and warmth became a defining feature, reshaping perceptions and challenging assumptions. As time went on, the husband observed the subtle but profound ways in which she influenced those around her. He noticed how people gravitated toward her in social settings, how colleagues valued her insights in professional discussions, and how neighbors sought her guidance in community matters. It was clear that her presence carried weight not because she demanded it, but because she embodied a rare combination of humility, intelligence, and confidence that naturally drew attention and respect. The realization was powerful. He understood that his long-held assumptions about her limitations were not only inaccurate, but also unfair. He had underestimated her resilience, her intelligence, and her ability to navigate complex social dynamics. And he recognized that the years of invisibility he had imposed, though rooted in love and concern, had delayed the recognition and fulfillment she deserved. This awareness prompted a deeper reflection on his own behavior. He considered the ways in which his need for control had shaped their lives, and how his assumptions had inadvertently suppressed her potential. He felt a mixture of regret and admiration for the lost opportunities. An admiration for the remarkable woman who had thrived despite the constraints he had placed upon her. Their interactions began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. He listened more attentively, asked for her opinions, and encouraged her to pursue her interests and talents. He celebrated her successes, both privately and publicly, acknowledging the qualities that had long been hidden from the world. And she, in turn, embraced the opportunities to share her gifts, confident that her presence was valued and her voice was heard. The transformation extended. Beyond their immediate relationship, their home became a place of shared decision-making, where both partners contributed to planning, problem-solving, and envisioning the future. Conversations that had once been dominated by practicality and routine now included exploration, creativity, and mutual support. The partnership that had been constrained by fear and habit evolved into one of collaboration, respect, and shared growth. Even as she embraced her expanded role, she remained grounded in humility and authenticity. She did not seek to overshadow others, nor did she allow recognition to inflate her sense of self. Instead, she focused on meaningful contributions, thoughtful interactions, and genuine connections. Her presence became a source of inspiration not only to those who met her socially, but also to the husband who had long believed he needed to shield her from the world. The ripple effect of her emergence was evident in their broader social circles. Friends and colleagues began to approach her for advice, collaboration, and support. Her perspective was sought in matters ranging from professional projects to community initiatives. And her ability to engage thoughtfully and empathetically earned her respect and admiration. People who had once assumed she was quiet and reserved now recognized the depth, intelligence, and warmth she brought to every interaction. The husband observed all of this with a growing sense of humility and pride. He realized that his protective instincts, while rooted in love, had inadvertently limited the recognition she deserved. Her emergence into the social world was not only a personal triumph for her, but also a transformative experience for him. He saw, more clearly than ever, the remarkable qualities that had always existed within her. And he understood that true partnership required acknowledgement, support, and shared respect. As time passed, the couple found a new balance. The dynamics of control and invisibility gave way to collaboration and mutual appreciation. They attended events together, navigated social spaces as partners, and engaged in meaningful conversations with friends and colleagues. Her presence, once hidden, became a source of inspiration, intelligence, and warmth that reshaped the way people perceived them both. At home, the changes were equally profound. Conversations became more open and inclusive, decisions were made collaboratively, and each partner's strengths were recognized and celebrated. The quiet house that had once been a space of routine and predictability now resonated with energy, creativity, and mutual respect. The relationship that had been defined by fear, habit, and protection had evolved into one of partnership, trust, and shared growth. Through it all, she remained grounded, authentic, and humble. She continued to contribute thoughtfully, engage meaningfully, and navigate social spaces with grace. Her confidence, intelligence, and warmth became defining features, inspiring those around her and challenging assumptions about the roles women could occupy in both private and public life. The husband, witnessing this transformation, felt a deep sense of admiration and respect. He understood that his role was no longer to protect or control, but to support and celebrate. He recognized the remarkable woman he had always loved, now fully visible to the world. And he embraced the opportunity to walk beside her as an equal partner. And in this quiet but profound evolution, both discovered a new way of being where presence, recognition, and respect were shared freely, where partnership was defined not by control but by collaboration, and where the light she had carried quietly for so long was finally allowed to shine fully. Touching everyone around her, the days following the luxury party brought a quiet transformation that touched every corner of their lives. She moved through the house with a new confidence that was subtle but unmistakable, her presence filling the rooms with warmth and energy. Even small gestures, the way she poured coffee, arranged the flowers, or smiled at a passing thought, felt different. There was a lightness in her step, a quiet authority in her voice, and a strength in her demeanor that could not be ignored. He noticed everything. At first, he tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was merely a change from the excitement of the party. It would fade as quickly as it had arrived. But the more he observed, the more he realized it was not temporary. She had changed, yes, but more importantly, he had begun to see her in a new light. The years he had spent shielding her from the world, the assumptions he had carried about what she could or could not do, and the careful control he had maintained, all of it now seemed unnecessary. She had always been capable, brilliant, and remarkable. It had simply taken the right moment for the world and for him to notice. Conversations between them began to change. Where once he had dominated discussions with decisions, opinions, and plans, he now found himself listening more, asking for her thoughts, and truly valuing her perspective. She responded with grace, offering insights that were thoughtful, nuanced, and grounded in experience. It was not about proving herself to him or the world. It was about being recognized for who she truly was. And he, for the first time, understood that recognition was overdue, and wholly deserved. The ripple effect of her presence continued beyond the walls of their home. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had attended the party spoke about her often, recalling the warmth of her smile, the intelligence in her words, and the ease with which she carried herself. Messages and calls came in, expressing admiration and curiosity, seeking her advice or simply wanting to reconnect after the evening's unexpected impression. She responded with humility, never flaunting her newfound recognition. But her confidence naturally commanded respect. At the same time, she began to explore new opportunities. The encouragement she had received, the validation from her presence at the party, and the growing awareness of her own abilities fueled a desire to engage more fully with the world. She considered projects she had once dismissed, ideas she had quietly nurtured for years, and possibilities that had seemed out of reach. Each decision she made carried the weight of self-belief, and each action reinforced the truth that she was ready to step fully into her potential. He watched these changes with awe and quiet humility. The realization that he had underestimated her for so long was humbling, but it was also a moment of profound gratitude. He had spent years believing he was protecting her, shielding her from scrutiny and judgment, and maintaining control over their lives. And yet the very qualities he had thought needed protection, her intelligence, her grace, her confidence, were exactly what made her capable of thriving in the world. He understood that true love, partnership, and respect meant allowing her to shine, not keeping her in the shadows. Together, they began to navigate life differently. Social gatherings that had once been intimidating or unnecessary became opportunities for her to contribute, to be heard, and to connect. He found himself accompanying her not as a guide or protector, but as a partner, celebrating her achievements and learning from her perspective. Their conversations at home became richer, more open, and more collaborative. Decisions that had once been unilateral were now joint, each of them contributing insight, creativity, and experience. The transformation extended to their wider social circle as well. Friends who had once assumed she was quiet and reserved now sought her out, drawn to her intelligence, warmth, and authenticity. Her presence influenced conversations, encouraged thoughtful dialogue, and inspired others to consider perspectives they had previously overlooked. The subtle authority she carried was neither forceful nor commanding. It was simply the natural result of confidence, authenticity, and the recognition that she deserved to be seen. At work and in the community, her influence grew as well. Projects she contributed to were enriched by her ideas, and people increasingly valued her perspective. She began to mentor and advise, offering guidance that was practical, empathetic, and insightful. Her ability to listen, understand, and provide meaningful input set her apart, and her presence created a quiet but powerful impact on the spaces she entered. The husband, observing all of this, felt a profound shift within himself. He realized that his protective instincts, while well-intentioned, had been based on fear and assumptions rather than necessity. He had sought to shield her from the world, believing he was acting in her best interest. But in reality, he had limited both her opportunities and his own understanding of what a partnership could be. Watching her flourish brought a mix of humility, pride, and deep admiration. He understood that she had always possessed the qualities needed to succeed and inspire. and that his role was not to hide or control, but to support, celebrate, and learn alongside her, their home. Once a space of quiet routine, now resonated with shared purpose and energy. Conversations flowed freely, decisions were made collaboratively, and each of them contributed uniquely to their life together. The balance of their relationship shifted from control and protection to partnership and mutual respect. The years of invisibility and quiet sacrifice had given way to visibility, recognition, and shared growth. She remained grounded throughout these changes. The attention she received, the admiration of others, and the validation of her abilities did not make her arrogant or boastful. Instead, she remained thoughtful, humble, and intentional in her interactions. Her confidence was not about proving herself to anyone. It was about living authentically and fully, and in doing so, inspiring those around her.